Buffalo Springfield with the track Burned from their 1966 debut album. That was a Neil Young cut, of course. The life, music, and career of Neil Young get the deluxe treatment in author and rock journalist Harvey Kubernik's new book, Heart of Gold. We'll be giving away a copy of that book in a few short moments. Harvey, welcome to the show. You know, I was thinking when someone walks into a bookstore and sees your book on the shelf, they might think, oh, a big coffee table book, it must be all photos. But that's not the case. I mean, there's a lot going on here, a lot of history.
There's a lot going on. Yeah, it came out in October, and it's reasonably priced, believe me. And it's a book that combines, visual artifacts, color photos, black and white, as well as, ephemera, with, writing, narrative, and multi-voice contributors getting involved. So it's not a picture book. There's a lot of story being told and foreshadowing and reoccurring themes. I mean, I kind of do these books this way. It's not an authorized biography, but if you're a Neil Young fan or a fan of Buffalo Springfield, or you like classic Neil, early Neil, recent Neil, it's all there. I mean, it covers 50 years.
Yeah. And this is sort of your milieu, the West Coast music scene, late 50s through the early 70s, correct?
Yeah, although, I tell everybody, I've interviewed Ice Cube 3 times. But what has happened, and this is in the last 5 or 8 years, I got to do a lot of books, and still more to come, that are very linked to the West Coast and Hollywood and Los Angeles, and the singer-songwriters out here, and also the roots rock music and the psychedelic music. And much of that music, of course, is spread across the world in the United States. And so, I'm affiliated with it. I'm very proud of it. And because I'm also a native Angelino, I think I bring kind of a different slant to this world that I've been documenting and chronicling, because I was there when this music was birthed and done. This is not revisionist history.
Right.
So I happen to have experienced, things like the formation of the Beach Boys, or situations of the original British invasion, or, seeing the Doors in the late 60s in live performance. It just, these things turn out to be some assets in doing these books, because, I was there.
With all that background and history, was there a prolonged research period for this book, or you were just in the middle of all this stuff and had been for nearly 50 years as a journalist?
An email came and asked if I wanted to do a book on Neil Young. I didn't solicit this. This is one of the situations where it came to me.
Sure.
On the heels of a Leonard Cohen book that I did a year ago with the same publishers and packagers. And I thought about it for, a day, and it made a lot of sense, because I'd witnessed Neil in some incarnations. Many people that write articles about him or have done previous books never had the privilege or the opportunity, meaning I saw the original Buffalo Springfield a couple of times. Mm-hmm. I attended Neil's one of his really early acoustic shows in 1971 at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in downtown Los Angeles. I actually was at the Last Waltz show, which I know your listeners are very familiar with in yourself.
Sure.
So I had this history with Neil, as well as being a record collector. As far as the research, there are some interviews in this book that go back 38 years, like when I interviewed Robbie Robertson in 1976 for Crawdaddy magazine about The Last Waltz. A little bit of that ends up in this book, talking about The Last Waltz and Neil Young a little bit.
Right.
And then, things where I'd interviewed Richie Foray of the Buffalo Springfield in 2004. I asked him, obviously, about Neil Young and Steven and recording, the Clancy, or For What It's Worth, and things like that. So I had some archive interviews, but then I spent the last, 6 or 8 months doing a lot of other new interviews of people I wanted to bring in, to the journey, because, I just wasn't just going to shuffle the deck and create a book out of my archive stuff. I would say I had 20 archive interviews, and I did another 40 And I had some pictures and visuals, but I had some connections, and I was kind of prepared that if this ever happened, this thing could come together. But it was a lot of work, because when somebody like Neil Young is very well documented out there, from official websites to his own websites to previous books, and if I was going to do this, it was going to really be original, and because it just isn't a book with a few black and white photos in the middle of the book or scattered through the book. There's some really rare concert posters and real interesting artifacts. And it also is a book which I think works with the casual Neil Young reader, the hardcore collector, or radio stations like yours that play Neil in various guises. And the related, Southern California music that, he's always been involved with.
You mentioned all these people that have worked with Neil Young in the past that you've spoken to. Who brings a fresh perspective to Neil's life and work? When you have an interview with someone, who surprises you?
I never get tired of speaking or interviewing Graham Nash. He's such an honest, candid person, including discussing Neil Young, who is one of his bandmates on occasion. And if Graham Nash is like Keith Richard. If you ask him a question, he will tell you immediately what he's thinking. And so he really brought a lot to the table. Not all the interview is in this book, but he had some very interesting things to say. Nils Lofgren, shed some insights into Neil, and it's really a recording and music study. I got a hold of the engineer Bill Halverson, who I've interviewed before, and I got to ask him about the Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young recording session for Ohio. And I don't think we get to see, my thing is, it's one of my, I would never say the secret of my success, but one of the things I learned doing this for, I think, 44 years already, I always embraced the engineers at recording sessions, or the co-producers, or the people in the back room, or the tape operators. They have stories, right? And they also are there watching the recordings being made. And I don't get so crazy and technical that the common reader or the record collector would get turned off if I mention Ampex 456 tape or those kind of things. But I do think the engineers that I find, and some of them are not on the planet anymore. Like Stan Ross and Larry Levine, who were involved at Gold Star Studios in Hollywood, where the Buffalo Springfield did their first album, and Neil did some recording over the years and had records mastered there. I just kind of think those engineers really bring a lot to the table. And I also make it a point to bring in some voices and some people that haven't appeared in other Neil Young books in the index, or really bring something to the table. And I mean, these are the things that people constantly bring up to me, saying, "I didn't know you interviewed Stan Ross. Didn't he die 10 years ago?" I said, "Well, yeah, but maybe I did the interview 22 years ago." and listen, I didn't know when I was doing a lot of these interviews for this book, or my Turn Up the Radio book, or the book I did on the Beatles, or the book on Laurel Canyon music, or my book on documentary film. I didn't know, from 1974 to 1990. In a world pre-internet, shall we say, I didn't know the things I chronicled or filed would have pay dividends or have this extra life, being online, or actually be, research for books 10, 20, and 30 years later after they were done. That wasn't the game plan. It just so happens that a lot of the things I liked back then have come around now through online digital distribution, reissues, box sets, monocopies, vinyl. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And all of a sudden, I'm not weird anymore talking to Bob Johnston, the producer of Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline, or John Wesley Harding. Everybody else wishes they met or talked to that guy.
Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young with Ohio right here on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop. We're chatting with author and rock journalist Harvey Kubernik. His book about Neil Young is called Heart of Gold. We'll be giving away a copy of that book in just a few short minutes. Harvey, you mentioned things coming back around again, and I'm reminded of the resurgence of vinyl. And I keep thinking that it must have something to do with young people looking at their iPods after reading one of your books, perhaps, or learning about the history of rock and roll via the internet, and they must be thinking to themselves, I missed out on everything that was important. I need to go back and, maybe try to recreate that experience.
Very good point. I'm a guy that, worked with and recorded with Phil Spector and had a back to mono button. So let's be clear on that one. I understand vinyl because I come from a world. I remember when the cassette and the 8-track cartridge was introduced.
Right.
And I do like the warmth of vinyl. And there's a romantic relationship you have with vinyl because you sort of have to sit down and hear it stationary.
Right.
It's a little different than the transportive aspect of schlepping it with you as a mobile device. That being said, the vinyl usually comes complete with original liner notes or something inside. Right. And I think what's happening is that, today's demographic, and I'm talking about the people buying either high-end stereos. It's an interesting world. You have 60 and 70-year-old people rebuying their favorite albums like Stand Up, although I think on vinyl you don't get the pop-up cartoon thing.
Right. Right.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. You just talked to Ian Anderson.
Right.
Okay, but seriously speaking, you have people that really want to hear their music proper on really good stereos, or they want to spend time just absorbing the vinyl aspect. And then you have a bunch of new people, 15, 20, 25, 30 years old, who actually have looked at the world, looked at the records that are available online or at the top 20, or looked at VH1 or MTV and seen all 100 rock and roll documentaries, and they've said, hold it, I think I'm going to go back to this music 1962
Right.
to 1980.
Right.
I mean, I wrote a book 2 years ago called Turn Up the Radio, Rock, Pop, and Roll in Los Angeles, 1956 to 1972. That Sweet 16 sweet spot, that world where, this kind of answers your question, I think people are drawn to the music that was made on 2- and 4-track tape recorders.
Yep.
The musicians played live. Often you'd cut 2 records in a 4-hour session or something. When the 8-track came in the very, very late 60s, the Beatles got an 8-track halfway through the White Album recording. All of a sudden, you had more tracks to play with, or a world today where people are recording in different countries and just sending sound files over. So I think people like and feel the music of yesteryear, that people may use terms like, oh, it's more authentic, it's more real, it's more honest. Well, maybe those are part of the adjectives, but you know it when you hear it, and all of a sudden people are really investigating mono things, vinyl, and I'm seeing record stores selling vinyl only. Part of it is that people are buying the albums for the album covers because you don't want to see your favorite album squished down on a tiny CD player, and you can hardly read the liner notes on a CD.
Right.
You need reading glasses. That's not the way it was set up. However, I'm all for all the formats, being out there.
Harvey Kubernik, his new book about Neil Young is called Heart of Gold. In a roundabout way, we were talking about Neil Young, but we got on the topic of the resurgence of vinyl records and collecting vinyl. And, I was in a bookstore just the other day, and I noticed that their CD collection had dwindled to nothing, and they had, in fact, started stocking more vinyl records.
I have been waiting for that signal for many years, because I used to say to people around here, because, I know a lot of the people that are in the Kaleidoscope or the Doors or the Beach Boys. It's just because I'm out here and I've reviewed them all, or met them all, and
right.
met their, as they say. Oh, well, if we're something about Harvey, he's met both the first and the second wife. But I'm friends with all of them. But I knew when I saw new record stores open, and I knew vinyl sections, and people were knocking walls down to have a larger vinyl section. And I also noticed, I would never call it a trend, but I think you'd probably agree with me. Over 20 years, or 10 or 12 years, I watched a lot of record collections being bought, or shall we say, rap producers coming into record stores and buying vinyl, primarily for sampling purposes.
Yes. Yeah.
And I am not putting that down. It's part of the game, part of the gig. But very few of these people ever wanted to talk to me about collecting the records or B-sides or did you ever see this group play live? I mean, they had no relationship to the journey inherent with the vinyl or where it came from. It was simply to pick up some beats or drop-ins. And by the way, people got paid. There was sampling. There were clearances involved. Okay, I'm not seeing that much anymore. I'm seeing record collectors buying vinyl. I'm seeing new kids buying vinyl. I am thrilled by this National Record Store Day, including this little scene, Black Friday, and you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I dig all this stuff partly because my audience, and this is just me being self-centered for a minute. I think I'm allowed that. I'm looking at my audience, or the people who buy my books, or the people who review my books, or the people who want me to lecture, or whatever, or be in anthologies. This thing is building because people want the truth, people want the heat, people want the passion. People know when it's good, and a lot of the music that people sort of mocked 10, 20, 30 years ago has durability and staying power. And I watched music being scorned as has-been music to now being worshipped and being at the Kennedy Center and stuff like that.
Right. You know what's great about this conversation? We've gone so far afield from the Neil Young. But you know what? We really haven't.
Listen, I know how popular Neil is back there. The East Coast and those states are always on his schedule. Neil Young is... somebody points out in the book a guy named Gary Stewart who used to work at Rhino Records and then actually was involved very early with Steve Jobs, in music licensing at Apple Records. This is in my Turn Up the Radio book that I sort of suggest people, if you like the Neil Young book and if you like Leonard Cohen and if you truly like the music of the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, I encourage you to go check out Turn Up the Radio, my book. It's on Amazon and everything because you get to study these people in depth and the music, and I have a lot of the engineers in the book. But Gary Stewart said about Neil Young in the book, and it's in the Neil Young book, and he talks about it also in the Turn Up the Radio book. Neil Young, like Elvis Costello and a couple other people, have escaped the classic rock coffin.
Right.
And you know what I'm talking about when I say that. And it's important, whether it be, his environmental, new music, or working with, Willie's kids, or doing the bridge concerts, or for many years having, alt-rock bands record with him or open his shows. Just collectively, he's not an oldies act.
Right.
And I think that's part of his vision that he knew very early on he didn't want to be. I mean, I think he can do a show, and he's not forced to play Cinnamon Girl or Down by the River and things like that all the time.
Harvey, where can people catch up with you online?
A few different places. Couple things. Backbeat Books, which is the Neil Young United States publisher, and the Leonard Cohen thing. Backbeat Books, has a website, but there's also a place called Otherworld Cottage Industries. Otherworld Cottage Industries, which is kind of serving as my almost production house, with somebody who was involved with me, Travis Pike. And Otherworld Cottage Industries has kind of a little website place called Coob's Corner. It's part of Otherworld Cottage Industries, and it kind of has activities and archives and links of earlier radio shows and stuff like that. I am constantly embracing the new world of technology and social media. Not that I'm a total Luddite, but I'm so busy doing the books and immersion, I can't sit there, and I don't want to live on Facebook and chat, Snap, and all that stuff all day.
Right.
However, I'm doing a lot of phone interviews, and I'm just kind of delighted. I get a lot of fan mail from New Jersey, WBRU, Brandeis, the WFMU people. I mean, I'm very partial, to college radio and this kind of stuff, but I've had a blast talking, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Once again, Harvey Kubernik has been our guest today on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop. His book is called Heart of Gold, about Neil Young, and we're giving a copy of that book away. Phone lines are open, 2012. And Harvey, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.